Representative Ron Paul.
Yeah! Ron Paul! Ron Paul! Ron Paul!
Representative Duncan Hunter.
Doctor of 30 years and having delivered 4,000 babies, I can assure you is at conception. I am legally responsible for the unborn no matter what I do. So there's a legal life there. The unborn has inheritance rights, and if there's an injury or a killing, there is legal entity. There's no doubt about it. I am surprised that I don't have more co-sponsor for the Sanctity of Life Act that I have, which would solve all this problem and would have eliminated a lot of abortions by now, and would have passed it, and we wouldn't need any amendment. It removes the jurisdiction from the federal courts. If the states were allowed to pass this, immediately it would go into effect. Instead of waiting years and years and years for an amendment, this would happen immediately by majority vote in the Congress and a president's signature. There's much easier ways to accomplish this by following what our Constitution directs us to do, instead of looking for massive new laws. Let's just use what we have and pass this type of legislation.
Dr. Paul, many libertarians oppose laws at all levels of government against so-called same-sex marriages and other matters such as prostitution and illegal drugs. What is your view?
Well, first off, this is a very important question because libertarian sometimes is misconstrued. Libertarian means liberty. If you believe in liberty, you're a libertarian. The best libertarians that we've ever had in this country were our founding fathers. They believed in civil liberties, economic liberties, and they believed in a non-interventionist foreign policy. They wanted peace and trade. So this is all good. But the inference here about marriage and prostitution and drugs, they never addressed it. There's no federal authority, no federal government authority, no constitutional authority to deal with those problems. There's no prohibitions for the states to do it, so that is perfectly all right. But what we as conservatives must remember, if you're willing to use the strong arm of government to regulate things that are negative, that you don't like and you find abhorrent, you set the stage for regulating your religion, your schools, and everything else, because that's the principle. The First Amendment wasn't written to protect non-controversial speech. It was written to protect controversial speech so that we don't lose our right to go to church and run our schools. This is key. On the issue of drugs, we have spent nearly $500 billion on the war on drugs since the 1970s. Total failure. Someday we have to admit it. Today we have the federal government going into states that have legal medical marijuana, arresting people, undermining state laws, arresting people who use marijuana when they're dying with cancer and AIDS, and it's done with as a conservative compassionate conservative. And it doesn't work. What it does, it removes the ability of the states to do these things, and also introduces the idea it's the federal government that will rule whether you get to take vitamins and alternative medical care or whatever. Most of our history, believe it or not, had no drug laws. Prohibition has been an absolute failure for alcohol. Drug addiction is a medical problem. It's not a problem of the law.
All right, our next speaker is Representative Ron Paul.
I get to my God through Christ. Christ to me is a man of peace. He is for peace. He's not for war. He doesn't justify preemptive declared war. I strongly believe that there is a Christian doctrine of just war, and I believe this nation has drifted from that. No matter what the rationales are, we have drifted from that, and it's very, very dangerous, and I see in many ways being unchristian. Christ is for love and forgiveness and turning the other cheek, for peace. And to justify what we do in the name of Christianity, I think is very dangerous and not part of what Christianity is all about. Christ came here for spiritual reasons, not secular war and boundaries and geography. And yet we are now dedicating so much of our aggressive activity in the name of God. But God, He is the Prince of Peace. that's what I see from my God, and through Christ, I vote for peace.
Yeah! What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do?
This is an easy one for me. Not only do I not want a North American Union, I want us out of the UN. NAFTA has nothing to do for free trade. It's a pretense to lower tariffs, but it's a reason to go talk to the WTO to raise tariffs. We need free trade. That's very, very important. But you don't get that by world government. And those of you who are so high-minded about sovereignty, you wouldn't support this war because there's two reasons we've gone to war. One, to go after the weapons, which didn't exist, and the other is to enforce UN resolution. That's criminal. I think we would follow the Constitution on trade and on war. If we would have only declared the war, we would have the debate before the war instead of afterwards, after we've lost 5,000 men in the military. We ought to follow the rules of the law and the Constitution.
Well, you have 4 minutes for your closing statement.
Thank you. We have been blessed to be able to live in the greatest country in the world. We've had the best contract between the people and the government, but we're losing it, and we have to realize that. We have resorted to going to Washington for everything. We cannot go to Washington to dictate to us how we improve our personal behavior. You don't dictate, you don't legislate virtue. In a free society, you do that from the people, from your family, your friends, and your neighbors, but not in the federal government. Also, you can't legislate economic fairness like so many want to do. Freedom means freedom. It means the government should be very small. Also, although we have many good qualities, if you accept the principle that we can promote our qualities and force them on other people at risk, you're in big trouble. Because there is a true phenomenon called blowback, and people don't like to have their countries occupied, and they will resent it, and we will suffer the consequences from this. In the last several years, we as a party and as a country, we have suffered because the conservative movement has been taken over by the neoconservatives, and they're not conservatives at all. They don't believe in limited government. They believe in entitlements. They also believe in the Woodrow Wilson's philosophy of making the world safe for democracy. Run around the world and forcing ourselves and bankrupting this country. We're spending nearly $1 trillion a year overseas, and this country's in bad shape financially. So we need to decide what we're going to do. Are we going to live within the law, or are we going to pretend the government can take care of everything possible? We are now $9 trillion in debt. We have a dollar that's crashing, and we keep financing this by taxing, borrowing, and then what do we resort to? We resort to printing the money. We should look to the Constitution. We should make sure that we get rid of our central bank, the Federal Reserve, and have only gold and silver as legal tender. This is the reason our government gets so big, because we give them license to steal, license to inflate, license to tax, and license to borrow, and politicians will always do it. What we should struggle for is our freedom. Have faith and trust in freedom that it works. We've lost our faith and confidence in ourselves. We feel like we have to be the bullies of the world, and we feel like we have to have government in Washington. What happens when government fails in Washington? Going to go to the UN like we already have? We already obey the WTO. We changed tax laws because of the WTO. There's every reason in the world that if we just look to our traditions and understood our problems, we can once again set the goal for liberty, not for this perfect society that comes at the sacrifice of liberty. When you ask government to do it, you have to sacrifice liberty. This is not difficult to understand, but right now we are drifting rather rapidly into a totalitarian state. We have been too willing to sacrifice our liberties for this so-called sense of security. We need more faith in the Second Amendment. We need more faith that the right of habeas corpus should be protected. And we have to understand the national ID card is not going to work. That only registers and regulates the American people. And we don't need secret prisons. We don't need torture. We need American values and traditions. We need to believe in ourselves. And once again, I would like to reiterate from a Christian viewpoint, you know, the true doctrine of war written by Christianity. The doctrine of non-war, the just war, is that you do it only under certain circumstances. You don't do it for UN resolutions. You don't do it for weapons that don't exist. You need to do it with a moral justification. If we would have declared the war like I insisted they should if they want to go to war, we wouldn't be debating the war now. It would be over and we'd all be a lot better off, and we would have 5,000 Americans still alive and 30,000 uninjured.
Okay.